Okay, folks, welcome to the iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast of Monday. I've got Stuart Lockhead with me today. Not sure what's happening with Jimmy.
Hello there.
Haven't heard from him. He may well be stuck in traffic. The background, Stuart pointed out, the background was particularly bloodthirsty. That is in homage to our mainstream media and the Margaret Ferrier debacle.
The hyena pack, as also known as. We're not alone in calling them that.
No, we're not. I think we'll go with a press conference.
Well, do you want to tell them what? Yeah, you might as well tell them about your. You watched the.
Well, I've started watching BBC1, which has basically, as soon as the BBC's question is over at the press conference, they switch to the studio, where they have the last couple of times they've had an expert to talk, which gives them then the excuse to bring in whichever opposition party they're particularly friendly with on the given day, to do a hatchet job on the SNP.
They don't actually wait to the end of the press conference at all. They don't wait for the best bits. They miss all the dodgy, the Telegraph and the Mail and the Express.
I don't know if you remember me suggesting that what they should do is make the BBC the third or fourth question, forcing them basically to stick with the press conference for at least longer than the first question, which is inevitably the BBC. Although the other day it was ITV got the first question. The point really I want to make is that it was so obvious today that this had nothing, well, that's not fair, that this was a platform for opposition members to criticize the SNP rather than talk about the pandemic.
I call it the SNPbaad show.
Yeah, essentially. But Ms. Baillie essentially said she would support the Scottish government in any decisions it had to make to contain the pandemic, but would like it to be brought before Parliament to be discussed. I don't think she went so far as to say to be voted on, but to be discussed.
Well, that's that was toward right at the end. First Minister said yes, she wants it to go as far as a vote this week.
Yeah, I mean, and she said it I think a couple of times at least. Ms. Baillie then took the opportunity. I can't remember what the question was, but it was on the lines of, are the public getting fed up with lockdowns and are they starting to disobey? Which was the opening she needed to bring up the Margaret Ferrier case. And she decided Nicola Sturgeon hadn't gone far enough because she hadn't expelled Margaret Ferrier from the party.
I thought you were going to say she hadn't hung, drawn and quartered her yet.
Well, that effectively is what Jackie Baillie's asking for. Now, Jackie Baillie is the member of a party that has taken no action against numerous Labour councillors who have gone into coalition with the Tories against the express orders of their party leader.
It's the rules of the Labour Party, I believe, as well. It's against their own rules.
There you have it. And they've failed to expel these councillors. Sturgeon's position on it is pretty simple. There is due process, which has to be gone through. Apparently it's a legal obligation, whether that's Scottish law or party law, I'm not really sure. But she's insisting that Margaret Ferrier goes through due process before she's expelled or not expelled.
She also said, in spite of the fact that she has been absolutely very strict matron or headmistress, you could, in style about this issue, she did say, look, it's still a woman who's ill at the moment, and she may need time to make a decision about her job.
Well, there were two questions involving Ferrier today at the presser. One from, gosh, what a surprise, to Daily Mail, and another from the Telegraph, who don't always appear at these press conferences. Both basically saying, why haven't you gone round to her house and put a bullet in her head?
Yes. What were the excuse for the male Michael Blakeley, who often gets shot in the foot by himself, but he often gets summarily executed or at least scalped by the First Minister. What did he say? He was trying to figure it to get it that because Margaret Ferrier on the Monday, it was Thursday before the First Minister heard about the situation. She walked out of First Minister's questions and was informed about how bad the situation was. On the Monday, Margaret Ferrier had asked someone else, presumably through the Whip's office, an SNP official, for a proxy vote because she was heading off back home.
Because she had a member of her family who were ill.
Yes, exactly. But the mail question was, but was the member of the family ill with COVID?
Because as First Minister, you should know the intimate details of every family who's a member of the SNP.
So that was that. But what was Simon Johnson at the Telegraph? Public perception.
He was trying to say that Sturgeon couldn't discipline her own members, her own MPs, because Margaret Ferrier had basically ignored her. Well, now that she's suspended from the party,
he was
party discipline doesn't apply to her.
He was hopeless on, even no chance on that one, because the perception of what Nicola Sturgeon has done is everything. She couldn't be much stricter. So basically, he was on a useless point.
And their problem is that they cannot believe there hasn't been a cover-up of some aspect, because the Tory party, which both papers support, would have covered something up somehow, some way, because of their nature.
Yeah.
I mean, the Tories have still got an MP who's been accused of rape with the Whip sitting in Westminster, because it wouldn't be fair to take the Whip off him at this point.
Is that the guy Francois or something?
Well, nobody knows who it is.
I don't know for sure, but the rumor mill is.
But it has totally disappeared off the radar now.
He's the only one that's missing.
So, well, I mean, he's not missing because he doesn't have the Whip. So I'm sorry, none of the other parties have a leg to stand on this one. Nicola Sturgeon has done absolutely everything she possibly could to take Margaret Ferrier out of the equation without basically breaking the party rules.
We had one interesting question that I found it interesting was from Alan Smith. Wait a minute, no. Fraser Knight from Global. That's one of the local radio, commercial radio channels. And apparently he was asking, that the First Minister in Wales has decided they're going to expect people who travel into Wales, people to travel into Wales from hotspots in England to have to quarantine. Now, he was, Fraser Knight wanted to know, would the First Minister consider that? And she said, oh, no, she hadn't thought of that, basically.
Well, she said, oh, no, I haven't heard of this.
Yes, exactly. I don't think the idea hadn't occurred to her yet. And she hadn't heard about Mark Drakeford saying as much. I thought she was quite fancied the idea on that one.
Well, it's totally taken the wings out of the Labour Party's sails on border stuff. The other interesting question will be what the Tories have to say about it.
Oh, no, but they'll have to say
because this is a unionist party that's made the decision. If the decision's been made, I'm not sure if it's not just a discussion.
We don't know. I think he must have been speaking about the same time as the First Minister here was.
Yeah. so it hasn't started exploding all over Twitter yet. The other main thrust was the circuit breaker, a phrase which the First
Yes,
Minister,
she doesn't like it.
no,
She said, well, there's got too many people. Different people have got different ideas what it means. But we've got most of the journalists, and I think most of us can see that we've got the furlough coming to an end. So now is the time. Furlough is coming to the end. We've got in Scotland, we've got the tatty holidays. In England, they've got what they call the midterms. So the schools are going to be closing anyway. So the pressure's on to make a decision this week. And we discovered from the First Minister that she's got a meeting with our equivalent of SAGE, with our health people this afternoon, and a cabinet meeting tomorrow morning to make the decision what they're going to do. And she also announced at the end of the press briefing today that there won't necessarily be a 12:15 briefing tomorrow because she'll be making the announcement in Parliament in Holyrood.
Well, here's a little thought for you. The Westminster government decides to introduce a circuit breaker for England, remembering that the holidays in Scotland and England are out of sync. They do not arrive at the same time.
In Scotland, they're staggered. They're not all at the same time, but in England, they are.
So they decide that what they're going to do is introduce some sort of payment and do this circuit breaker, lockdown hospitality, for the period of the school holidays, thereby basically forcing the Scottish government to find the money or beg for the money in the given period that applies to Scotland.
I think we've got an issue that I forgot to highlight. There it is. Yes, the First Minister also there's also a meeting of and it's not a COBRA meeting, but there's also a meeting of the 4 nations this afternoon as well to be taken into account. So it's all the big, so at that point they must be Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, and we'll all be saying we need money. I watched the Northern Ireland politics from Stormont over the weekend, and they're wanting the money. They're in exactly the same position as the Scottish government. They cannot make serious decisions about limiting people's movement in Northern Ireland unless they get money to replace the furlough. And things are going really daft in Northern Ireland.
Well,
it's going rocketing up a number of places.
I think Northern Ireland's in for a wee rude awakening. I think Westminster will create a fund at best that you have to ask to access, so they can then claim that it's Westminster's money that's helping Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The inference being it's English money. And I think they're going to play this really dirty. I don't think they're simply going to say, well, how much do you need?
I noticed that Sunak was making his speech to the virtual Tory conference this morning, and of course he's the hot favourite to replace Johnson, and Johnson's got his enemies, although in the backbenches, in the media.
Well, Johnson was quite happy to concede that Richie Sunak's tenner off your meal may well have helped spread coronavirus yesterday on Mar.
Was it him that said that? Was it? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
He didn't come out and say it. He was asked.
Yeah, he didn't.
And he said, well, I suppose there's a big word, bit of Latin, possibility that that's the case.
Oh dear, yeah.
So I think Sunak's speech apparently was very pro-Boris. Apparently Boris made all the right decisions.
The Irish situation, of course, we mustn't forget the Brexit situation there, and the so-called border and the Irish Sea, and going illegal and an international treaty and all that. It's also inseparable from the COVID situation, because that is one of the most porous international borders you could imagine.
Well,
And you've got Donegal and Dublin is where they've the highest rates of prevalence at the moment in the Republic. But Donegal actually uses Derry, Londonderry, as their main shopping street city, and it's in Northern Ireland, and that's where it's highest in Northern Ireland. It's like,
and according to that piece that you sent to me, Ireland is seriously talking about going to level 5.
yes, which was because it's straight back to where they were in
A lockdown.
April.
Yeah,
Complete lockdown.
yeah.
That they've been advised to do that by their medical people, but whether the politicians will agree to that, well, that's another story.
I have to admit, if I was a medical person, I would be advising total lockdown, regardless. We've got 3 cases in Auchtermuchty. We need to lock down the whole country.
One of the things I like
You
about
can't go wrong with a total lockdown.
I know. But there's a couple of extra things, Irish angles here. Apparently, there was one article there, I think it was in the Irish Times, but it was about what the Unionists' position could be about Brexit and how they have many advantages of actually. They should be quite happy because the situation with Northern Ireland staying in the United Kingdom is inside this new withdrawal treaty. It's an extra belt to go with their braces.
Well, that piece kind of suggested that they would get a much more sympathetic ear from Dublin than they ever did from Westminster.
And once UK is out of the EU, which will happen in the 1st of January, they'll have a backdoor through Dublin to get benefits from the EU.
Well,
and they'll be much more sympathetic to Northern Ireland than they ever would be to London.
But it's the blood and soil unionists that are going to find it very hard to wear a border.
Don't forget, they still like to line their pockets.
Yeah, but I mean, you can hear them now, and you can even hear the tone of the voice. They're not going to be happy if this border down the Irish Sea actually does become complicated for them.
I think I'm just pointing out there are other issues. Oh, one other Irish factor that I thought about. They have these clear levels of restrictions, levels 1 to 5. So even listening to the First Minister earlier on in her briefing today, and she's talking about the kind of restrictions, might have extra restrictions. She was asked, might there be local restrictions or would they be across everywhere? Well, we haven't made up our mind yet. Having a list of levels and what the restrictions are in each level, and you might say Auchtermuchty is going to be on level 3, and Glenrothes is going to be on level 4. You would actually know where you stand instead of having to redefine everything every time you decide what you've got new restrictions.
Yeah, but it opens up the other side of that can of worms. And why is Aberdeen on level 2 and Glasgow's on level 6?
That's already been an issue.
Exactly. And that becomes the problem. I mean, what they appear to be trying to do is identify the source of the spread, be it people going to house parties or people going to the pub or going to work in a meat factory, and dealing with the source of the spread. And that's got to be hugely complicated.
Well, we discovered today that not only is it, they're still worried about people's houses, but people socializing at work. In other words, when they go off to the social room, the coffee, the water cooler, or as they talk about it in posh places, they suspect that that's one of the places that cross-infection is taking place.
We've kind of moved from the presser to the papers. Anything else catch your eye in the blogosphere or the media?
Yes, let me bring it up on the other screen. Iain Lawson, I was quite taken with. He had an interesting idea. What's he got to say? He's kind of saying that the Nicola, tactically and from a strategic point of view, everything goes through Nicola. This is a bad thing. It removes the ability of the government to run two strategies on the same issue. What if one voice was being hugely constructive and doing a great job controlling the pandemic, while other voices were highlighting the problems she was facing due to the lack of powers at her disposal? And to some extent, that's what the Labour Party are already doing in London. So you've got Keir Starmer being quite gentle, apart from the one or two questions at PMQs, fully supportive, but you've got all the other shadow ministers slagging off everything they're up to. And there might be a bonus from that, is that the yes supporters might see that as, oh, all right, we're actually starting to think about another referendum.
My worry is that this SNP government becomes a government of the pandemic. So I can kind of sympathize with what Iain Lawson's saying. I'm not sure how it would work, because the minute the SNP criticise, as we've already said, the Westminster government, that becomes the headline. And they are dying to get away from the narrative that the SNP are looking competent during this pandemic.
Yes, I mean, doing the same thing but looking competent.
Yeah, well, if you look at the numbers, now that the mistake that's been found on the spreadsheet in England, they're doing rather better.
Yes.
Which will be no part of the reporting on the mistake on the figures in England.
No.
That was a question today. Will this affect Scottish figures? No, because we use our NHS to do the figures, not some crowd that doesn't build hospitals on time.
It was apparently some computers in England that had.
Well, apparently it was.
We have our own computers.
It was apparently an Excel spreadsheet that's got a limit to the number of lines you can put on it of information.
All right.
And nobody had noticed. So they've had to create more files to take the numbers.
Yeah, no, I haven't used Excel for a few years now, 10 years now. So, but yes, I did see a social media tweet, Twitter probably this morning, where apparently Serco, instead of Serco went and used Microsoft Office and Excel to handle this data, whereas anyone serious wouldn't be using that.
Well, Excel's a spreadsheet. You would have thought they'd be using a database.
Which used to be Access Island databases on.
So that you can play with it.
It's the wrong software then.
I mean, Excel's very good for the vast majority of things you want to do, but it's not a database.
It's not what Serco should have been using. No.
Well, unless they haven't got anybody that knows how to use a database, which I have, I think, 3 times attempted to train myself to do and never quite managed it, which is why I'm so adept at Excel.
Yeah. I went on a Saturday course to learn how to use Access. I'm none the wiser.
I got near it, but nah, I just couldn't quite get there. I put it down to an age thing. They wrote it for 13-year-olds.
Okay.
Anything else pop
up? Oh yes, George Kerevan. We're almost obliged to refer to George Kerevan every week because he does come up with interesting stuff. So what's he coming up here with now? George Kerevan, new money, CBDCs, central bank deficit.
Central bank digital currency.
That's it. Sorry. I was thinking about something swapped for some reason. And the Bank of England. New money for all. How the Bank of England plans to revolutionise the monetary system. Well, the listeners will be aware of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin being accused in this article by George Kerevan of being just a bubble, a Ponzi scheme. And bearing in, let's not get too hung up about that, but apparently Facebook is planning to launch its own digital currency. And of course, the major world banks, like the Fed in the USA, the central bank in China, whatever it's called, and the EU, the Euro Bank, they are all worried about losing control of their own currency because of the size of Facebook, of course.
Right. The Facebook currency, which is to be called Libra, effectively it takes control of your money supply out of government hands, just as Bitcoin and
does.
every other cryptocurrency would do. What it does is it stops governments controlling inflation. Technically, if Bitcoin is used correctly, you cannot have inflation because there's a finite amount of the currency in circulation.
Oh, but wait a minute. I'm an ignoramus on this. You're an expert. I gather you can buy an expensive computer and make your own Bitcoin.
It doesn't have to be an expensive computer. No, what you do is you buy a computer that does the transaction work of Bitcoin. That gets you a payment in Bitcoin. It's called mining, but you don't just create it yourself. Right. You have to work for it.
It's called mining, Bitcoin mining, is that right?
Yeah. So effectively, what you do is you allow that computer to be used to do transactions within the chain of transactions. The whole thing about Bitcoin is the chain makes it a safe currency. Nobody can steal it through the chain. They can walk into your house and steal your password or whatever, because you never keep your password online if you're dealing in Bitcoin, and you lose it and there's no way of getting it back. Drawback, certainly. But the point about it is that digital currency, like real money, if you want to call real money, fiat currency is produced by hitting the keys on a keyboard. It doesn't exist in a basement somewhere. And because the vast majority of the population believe the Bank of England have got a big stash of gold or notes or whatever that represents the actual amount of currency in the world, and until people realize this is not the case, that it's actually a balance sheet transaction, it will be difficult for people to get their heads around the idea of a digital currency.
Yeah.
The fear the banks have, as you said, is if Facebook makes this Libra work, they will lose control over their money supply, looking at money as a tool to control your economy. So George Kerevan's position is that Scotland should be looking at this now.
Certainly, because if the Bank of England move fast on this, which they may be forced to do because of Facebook's plans, then if they have a digital currency, well, it's another reason why Scotland, independent Scotland, needs to have its own currency right from the start.
I need to look into this deeper, but what George is saying is that it's going to be even more difficult than sterlinization would be for Scotland.
And bear in mind that like Facebook and digital currency, they'll know exactly where their population, where the populace, everybody in your country, if you're running your national sterling digital currency, they'll know where everybody's spending their money. All that data is very useful.
It's far easier. It would be with a digital currency. It's much easier to data mine everybody's life.
So in our world of pro-independence for Scotland, what he does say is, which means that yet on another front, the growth report has been rendered totally obsolete. Why would we seek independence only to hand over monetary control to a BOE that is planning to extend its influence via digital currency?
I would like to hear George's opinion on whether he thinks this present government at Westminster has the capability of introducing a digital currency.
Well, there's a very good point.
Without essentially sending it offshore.
I would also like to point out that the one thing I did hear Rishi Sunak say on the television, I was hardly on today, was that he was going for a balanced budget, which, given what they actually do with quantitative easing, they're just in denial of what they actually do. They don't do a balanced budget. They haven't done it for 15 years.
The other thing people have to remember is when the government takes money out of the economy gets poorer. When it puts money in, the economy gets richer, i.e., take it out, you get poorer, put it in, you get richer. And that's why austerity doesn't work.
It's like people don't really understand the difference between a household budget and a budget of a nation state that issues its own currency. But there was a lovely example just posted the other day. If Scotland did start independence with its own currency, everybody in Scotland would be able to exchange their English pounds for Scottish pounds. And if everybody did that, that would mean that the Scottish Reserve Bank would be holding a huge amount of foreign currency, which is apparently a good idea in most people's books.
Do you really want me to get into this?
Well, we can save that one to another day. One of the first subjects I studied when I left school was economics.
Here's a short
and macroeconomics
explanation why that can be a good or a bad thing.
Well, it would be
America has huge debts to China, but these are dollar debts. Now, China can actually spend dollars in other countries, but it's most likely because of the huge amounts of dollars China holds that they'll have to spend them in the USA. So that will benefit the USA economy, money being spent there. So the huge debt to China is not a problem because it's in dollars. So in effect, that same thing would apply to Scotland holding English money. It's not an advantage to Scotland, it's an advantage to England.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So
it's not as simple as it seems, and it really is not.
And can I just put a rider on that?
Yeah.
I am not an economist or a banker or an accountant. So if anybody out there has got a reason to tell me I'm wrong, I am prepared to listen and give you a platform.
No, I'll agree with you there, Norrie. I think you're right about that. In George's article, it's interesting. He compares. He makes it fairly clear. He kind of supports the idea that we should all be considering looking at national economies through the lens of modern monetary theory, because that's the reality of the situation. They're just kidding themselves on calling it something else.
Yeah, they've just put a name to something that's been going on for years. Yeah,
ever since, in particular, QE. And I'm not going to attempt to go into the detail. But put it this way, apparently Denmark, which is a country of similar size of Scotland, but independent of Scotland, generally speaking, has foreign currency reserves of about 50 billion. Scotland, if Scotland would have more than that on the very first day it exchanged all the English pounds for Scottish pounds. So whether it's a good idea or not would depend on whether you were right or wrong, Norrie.
Yeah, well, I think I'm right, but
I think you are right. I do think you're right.
Being really self-taught on this. I'm quite prepared to take criticism. I was going to bring up Saturday's Spectator podcast, which I think we'll possibly do another day because you haven't heard it. But I would recommend people to go and listen to what, shall we say, Scotsmen abroad think about the independence question.
You're going to
I'm gonna make you listen. I'm gonna make you listen to the very end.
You know, I get mentally ill having to sit through people like Marr not interviewing.
It's 20 minutes.
It's 5 minutes.
It's worth a listen. It's worth a listen. Because
my blood pressure will go through the roof in 20 minutes.
Well, just calm yourself. It's worth a listen because at the end, Isabel Harding, who's chairing it, asked them to give their percentage projection on Scotland becoming independent. And that really sums up the problem with these guys, because none of them really believe or seem to understand there's been a shift. Stephen Daisley, Frederick Forsyth, not Fred, is it Frederick? No, Forsyth.
Is it Lord Forsyth?
No, it's he's a journalist on The Spectator. And Fraser
he's a
Nelson,
young fella.
And Fraser Nelson.
Right.
But it's well worth a listen, just so that you understand why unionists come out with some incredibly stupid things. And these are people who are supposed to know what's happening in the UK. They might know what's happening in London, but they haven't got a clue with what's happening. So I think what I'll do, two things. I'll put it up on the site, a link to it for people to listen to, and I'll send it to you and Jimmy.
And I'll have to you'll force me to listen to it.
Well, things have not moved on south of the border. Let me put it that way.
If I have a stroke overnight, it'll all be your fault.
Well, the other thing is, the terrible thing I have to say is the only one that's got it anywhere near right, and he's not 100% right, is Stephen Daisley, who many of you may remember as a rabid unionist during the 2014.
Yes.
When he worked for STV,
No.
and he got bumped for tweeting unionist propaganda. He was their digital editor or something.
Right.
And he lost his job, but went to The Spectator in the end. So, will that about do us for today, Stu?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's dried up again. It's time for my afternoon walk.
Lucky you. Okay, folks, thanks for listening. Stuart, thanks for being with me. And as soon as we find out where Jimmy's hiding, we'll let you know, folks. Cheers for now.
Bye-bye.